No GPS dot. No text me when you get there. Do you remember a time when leaving the house meant disappearing? No GPS dot. No text me when you get there. Just the quiet trust that you would return before the streetlights came on. If you were born somewhere between the late 70s and mid-80s, you grew up in a world that no longer exists, and then had to become an adult in one that arrived almost overnight. You're not quite Gen X, shaped entirely in analog independence, but you're not truly millennial either, raised inside the architecture of the internet. You came of age in the seam between them, and living in a seam has a psychological cost, because identity usually forms from belonging to a place, a culture, a generation. But you were always slightly out of sync with both. Too young for the cynicism of Gen X, too analog for the native fluency of millennials. So you learned something subtle: how to adapt without fully identifying, how to move between worlds without claiming either one. You remember rewinding tapes with a pencil. You also remember your first email address feeling like a doorway into the future. Both memories are equally yours, and that dual memory of before and after shapes how you see change, risk, and time itself. You didn't miss the future, and you didn't lose the past. You were simply born at the hinge of history, the moment when one world closed softly and another began loading. Before algorithms learned your preferences, boredom was a daily landscape you had to cross on your own. There were long afternoons with nothing scheduled, nothing streaming, nothing glowing in your hand, no instant entertainment waiting to dissolve the silence. If you were a child then, boredom wasn't a failure of stimulation. It was the default state of being. So you invented things. You turned sticks into swords, sidewalks into racetracks, empty rooms into entire worlds. You learned, without realizing it, how to generate experience from imagination alone. Psychologists today would call this the default mode of the brain, the network that activates when attention turns inward. When the mind wanders, recombines, creates. But for you, it was simply Tuesday. You also learned to wait, for photos to be developed, for a favourite song to come on the radio, for a friend to show up at the agreed time, because once you left the house, you were unreachable. Waiting wasn't frustrating, it was normal, and in that waiting, something important formed, the muscle of delayed gratification, the quiet tolerance for uncertainty, the understanding that not everything arrives on demand. Your social world was physical, immediate, and unscripted. Conflict happened face to face. Tone, posture, and silence carried meaning long before text stripped them away. You learned how to read a room before you ever read a thread. You learned repair after friction, not escape after discomfort. And then there was solitude, not loneliness, but the simple condition of being alone with your thoughts. No notifications punctured the quiet. No infinite scroll replaced reflection. Your mind had space to echo. That childhood, now nearly extinct, left you with something rare, the capacity to tolerate stillness without panic, to imagine without input, to exist briefly, unentertained and unobserved. You are among the last adults whose inner life formed in that analog silence, before attention became a commodity and before boredom was engineered away. Then, just as you were becoming yourself, the world changed, not gradually, not across generations, but right in the middle of your adolescence, that fragile window when identity is still soft, still forming, still asking, who am I becoming? 1 year, connection meant a phone tethered to a wall. A few years later, it meant a glowing portal humming in the corner of the room, the internet arriving with the shrill song of a 56K modem. You were old enough to remember the before, young enough to master the after. And that combination created something psychologically rare, a kind of technological bilingualism. You learned the language of analog presence, eye contact, pauses, physical spaces, shared silence. And then you learned the language of digital mediation, usernames, typed tone, curated selves, connection without proximity. For you, the internet was never the air you breathed. It was a place you went. You logged on, and just as importantly, you logged off. There was a boundary, clear, almost architectural, between your physical life and your digital one. School, friends, family existed in one world. Chat rooms and early profiles existed in another. Crossing between them felt intentional, even experimental. You remember building your first online identity not as an extension of your real self, but as a version, assembled, edited, tried on. The early internet was less a mirror than a laboratory. But here's the quiet psychological shift. As adulthood unfolded, that boundary dissolved. The place you used to visit became the environment you lived inside. Work moved online, friendship moved online, memory moved online, and somewhere along the way, the log-off door disappeared. You carry even now the memory of when it existed, a time when connection had edges, when presence and absence were distinct states. Growing up during the internet shift didn't just teach you new tools, it rewired your sense of where life happens and left you with the strange, persistent awareness that reality itself once had an exit button. Identity usually grows from belonging, a generation, a culture, a shared story you can point to and say, that's mine. But if you are a Xennial, that recognition often arrived, slightly out of focus. You were told you were Gen X, yet you didn't quite share their hardened detachment, their fully analog formation. Later you were folded into Millennials, yet you never felt native inside the digital world that defined them. So you learned to translate rather than inhabit, to move between generational spaces without fully settling into either one. Psychologically, this creates a subtle but persistent state, the in-between identity. Not fragmented, but hybrid, not lost, but unclassified. You recognize both sides of the divide. You understand the pre-internet skepticism of older cohorts. You also understand the fluid, networked self of younger ones. But recognition is not the same as belonging, and over time, this produces a quiet self-perception. I adapt everywhere, but I originate nowhere. It's why generational debates often felt strangely external to you. Boomers versus Millennials, Gen X versus Gen Z. You watched, understanding both arguments, yet sensing neither described you. There is a psychological strength in this position. Cognitive flexibility, empathy across difference, comfort with transition. But there is also a cost, a softer anchor of identity. Fewer cultural mirrors, less reinforcement that your experience forms a coherent whole. So you constructed continuity internally, from memories that span incompatible eras, from a life that began analog and matured digital. Your mind learned to hold discontinuity without collapse, to bridge timelines inside a single self. You are not between generations by accident. You are what a transition looks like when it becomes human. Your childhood unfolded in the long, bright afterglow of the 1990s, a decade that felt, in hindsight, almost impossibly stable. The Cold War had ended, the economy expanded, technology promised progress, not disruption. The cultural story was simple: study hard, go to college, step into a future that would be wider and safer than the past. And you believed it, because children are supposed to believe the world they inherit will hold. But just as you reached the threshold of adulthood, the timing shifted. The dot-com bubble, the very future you were told to prepare for, burst as many of you were entering college or the workforce. Careers that looked inevitable suddenly dissolved. Stability became provisional. Then came September 11th. For Xennials, 9/11 did not interrupt midlife. It struck at the moment of launch, the age of first jobs, first apartments, first independent plans. The psychological message was immediate and visceral. The world can change overnight, and safety is not guaranteed by progress. This was not only fear, it was rupture, the collapse of an expected trajectory. And just as recovery seemed possible, another timing fracture arrived. The 2008 financial crisis landed precisely when many Xennials were approaching traditional milestones. Buying homes, forming families, consolidating careers. Again, the path shifted underfoot. These stacked disruptions imprinted a distinctive worldview often described as cynical optimism. You still hold the hope you were raised with, the sense that effort should matter, that the future can improve. But beneath it runs a steady awareness. Structures fail, systems break, timing betrays. So you plan carefully. You scan for exits. You expect change to arrive unannounced. The world did not change before you were ready, and it did not wait until you were secure. It changed exactly on cue, at the precise moment you stepped forward to meet it. When you were a child, communication had edges. Phones were attached to places, messages waited on machines, work stayed at work, home stayed home. Connection happened in intervals, not continuously. Then adulthood arrived, and with it, a quiet but total shift. Email followed you out of the office. Laptops followed you onto couches and airplanes. And eventually, the smartphone dissolved the last remaining boundary between presence and demand. For you, this was not normal. It was an intrusion that arrived after identity had already formed. You remember a time when being unreachable was ordinary, even expected. If someone needed you, they waited. If you were gone, you were simply gone. There was no ambient awareness of you, no status light glowing somewhere in the network. Now, adulthood lives inside an always-on field. Messages arrive at any hour. Work threads extend into evenings. Social ties pulse continuously in pockets and palms. The day has no clean perimeter. And this is where the friction lies for Xennials. You adapted to constant connectivity, but you never internalized it as natural. Part of your nervous system still expects intervals, pauses, offline stretches, spaces where attention can rest without vigilance. But the modern environment rarely grants them. So you carry a low-grade cognitive tension, the memory of bounded communication inside a life of perpetual reachability. A sense that you should be able to step out, yet nowhere fully exists outside the network anymore. The shock was never the technology itself. It was the disappearance of off. You became adults in a world where silence used to live, and now must be deliberately reclaimed. When you look at your child's world, you're looking at a childhood that is structurally different from your own. You remember bikes without tracking apps, afternoons without supervision, friendships negotiated face-to-face without digital witnesses. But the children you are raising live inside networks from the beginning. Their friendships extend through devices. Their risks travel faster. Their mistakes can persist. Childhood itself is now partially public, partially archived, partially mediated. And this creates a quiet parental dissonance, because part of you still measures real childhood by analog standards, outdoor autonomy, unstructured time, private experimentation. You want to give them the freedom you had, the boredom that shaped you, the offline space where identity could unfold slowly, without audience. Yet you also know the environment has changed. To remove them from digital life entirely is to isolate them. To immerse them fully is to expose them. So you parent across worlds. You translate dangers your parents never had to explain. Algorithms, permanence, strangers without faces. You also try to preserve experiences your children may never naturally encounter. Unplugged play, waiting, being unreachable. Beneath this balancing act lives something rarely named, a form of generational contrast grief. Not for your own childhood, but for the knowledge that its conditions cannot be recreated intact for them. So you improvise. Boundaries here, permissions there, screens negotiated, outdoors encouraged. You are raising digital natives with analog memory, and holding quietly the responsibility of remembering what childhood felt like before it was connected. At work, generational lines often run quietly through the room. On one side, colleagues shaped before digital acceleration, valuing hierarchy, tenure, clear boundaries between roles. On the other, those who grew up inside networks, fluent in rapid change, fluid identity, constant iteration. And you stand between them. You understand the analog logic of structure and loyalty. You also understand the digital logic of speed and flexibility. So you translate. You explain to older leaders why attention cannot be commanded indefinitely in an always-on culture. Why late-night emails ripple through teams long after they are sent. And you explain to younger co-workers why some systems still move slowly. Why trust accrues over time. Why presence sometimes matters beyond output. This is not just skill, it is cognitive positioning. Your mind was formed across two operational models of society, industrial and digital, and learned to navigate both without fully discarding either. Psychologists would call this cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift frameworks, integrate perspectives, hold contradictions without collapse. For Xennials, it is less a learned competency than an environmental adaptation. You were trained by transition itself, so you become the mediator, the interpreter, the connective tissue. Meetings settle when you reframe. Projects align when you translate expectations. Tension eases when someone understands both sides exist in your explanation. But bridges are rarely noticed unless they fail. Their work is to carry movement quietly. You operate in that same space, linking timelines, translating norms, stabilizing change. Not because you were assigned the role, but because your experience naturally spans divides others inhabit separately. You are not merely between generations at work. You are the architecture that lets them function together. By midlife, many responsibilities accumulate, but for Xennials, they often converge. Above you, parents are aging, living longer than previous generations, needing more coordination, more decisions, more presence, health systems to navigate, finances to monitor, roles slowly reversing. Below you, children are still forming, growing up in a world more complex, more exposed, more demanding than the one you knew. Their needs extend beyond care into guidance, digital safety, emotional literacy, future uncertainty. And between these two gravitational pulls, you hold your own life in suspension. Career stability arrived later than expected. Economic disruptions delayed milestones. So adulthood, for you, has often felt compressed, responsibilities intensifying just as footing finally solidified. Psychologists describe this as role strain, multiple high-demand roles with insufficient recovery between them. Caregiver, parent, worker, partner, mediator, each legitimate, each urgent, each drawing from the same finite reservoir of attention and energy. But there is another layer, quieter, generational invisibility. You're expected to manage upward and downward simultaneously, yet rarely framed as the central story. Support flows through you more than toward you, so fatigue accumulates not only from tasks, but from position, the structural middle, absorbing pressure from both directions. You keep schedules aligned, you bridge expectations. You carry memory and anticipation at once, and slowly, a specific exhaustion takes shape. Not collapse, but continuous load. The weight of holding two generations while still becoming yourself. There is something you carry that is becoming rare, not just nostalgia, but lived memory of a human pace that existed before constant connection. You remember days that unfolded without interruption, friendships that deepened without documentation, thoughts that formed slowly, unshared, unobserved. You remember what it felt like to be unreachable, and for that to be ordinary. As the world moves further into continuous presence, your memories become more than personal history. They are cultural memory, evidence that attention once had margins, that boredom once opened into imagination, that identity could form without audience or archive. You are among the last adults whose inner life began in that analog quiet. After you, childhood starts already connected, already searchable, already seen, and this is why your experience matters now more than ever. Because in a hyper-digital age, the future still needs people who remember the value of pause, of offline space, of human contact that exists without mediation. So if you recognize yourself here, in this bridge between eras, you are not invisible, you are continuity. If this reflection resonated, you might want to stay. This channel explores the quiet psychology of how we change with the world and how we remain human inside it. You can subscribe if you'd like to continue these deep dives together, and I'd love to hear from you. If you're a Xennial, what is one analog memory you still carry vividly? Share it in the comments. Let's map the last unconnected childhood while it's still within living reach. Thank you for watching.